All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm sure many of you guys are wondering, who is this? Uh, Believe it or not, this is John Leguizamo. I don't know if many of you know that he played basically a lieutenant for the devil in a movie called Spawn in 1997. Uh, and basically, he was trying to get Spawn to fight Satan's war. That was the basis of the movie. So this guy was basically, on the side of Satan. Now, I'm not saying that he's like that in real life, but I just thought it would be interesting to look at what he's doing presently in terms of this Latino Excellent project that he's doing with MSNBC, that I wonder who's behind this move. Uh, in my opinion, there's a lot of things that's been going on that's affecting the Black community. In recent months, we discovered that there's an attack on hip hop. Many have said that the hip hop is really not Black culture. It belongs to everybody, and Black people shouldn't take any credit for it. You also have the right wing making moves politically to exclude books, information that deals with the real history of America. For some reason, white people feel that it's upsetting to see their race portrayed in a negative light, even though it's true. What I find so interesting is that no one cared about the way Black people felt and how they were treated all these years. We were just asked to deal with it. Now we're becoming of age and we're starting to really document our history properly. You have people on the other side of this issue, they don't want to hear it. Now you have the Latino community coming in. Their numbers are getting larger. They're letting all these Latinos in this country, so their numbers are ballooning. And now they're getting political power. They're the number one minority, and they're exercising their more or less political power. And now they're starting to rewrite the history of Black people in America. And John Leguizamo is at the forefront of this movement. And so he has this series on MSNBC. And he's been on several interviews, and he made many claims. A lot of them are false and misleading. And it's ironic that you would think that a news organization would check him on some of the claims, but they don't. They allow him to say things that are just totally not true. So you kind of wonder, are these news agencies part of this plot to undermine Black achievement and replace it with Latino achievement? And so this video is going to deal with some of the false information that John Leguizamo has been putting out. Let me be clear. I haven't watched his series. I think I watched the first episode, so I really can't comment on the totality of the series. But if the series is anything like his interviews, they clearly are problematic, right? So there's 2 points I really want to tackle in this video. The first one is really 3. One being, are Latinos the oldest minority group? The second is that Latinos fight in every American war. And the third is that Latinos build America. Now, so I'm going to examine all of those things shortly. But let me deal with the Latino phrase first of all. The word Latino or Hispanic is not historically correct. There is no language in the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th century, 19th century that talks about or uses the word Hispanic or Latino. So these are new terms. So when John uses this term, he's trying to include all people of Hispanic origin or Spanish origin. Doesn't matter where they come from. So when he says that Latinos fought in every war, he's basically trying to include everybody. And that's simply not true. That is very misleading. So let me do this. Let me go into some of the documentation that I discovered, and we're going to break some of this information down. All right, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to read some excerpts from 3 articles that's going to talk about some of the history of Hispanics or Latinos, if you want to use that term, fighting in all the American wars. And we're going to focus on the Civil War for the purpose of this particular video. All right. Now, matter of fact, what I'll do, I'll leave a link to the articles in the description box when I'm done. So anyone have any questions about whether or not I took anything out of context, you could check it out for yourself. All right. So here we go. This is basically a background here. People of Spanish heritage established roots in North America centuries before the Civil War following the arrival of Columbus in 1492. Many explorers rushed to claim the New World for Spain, including mainland of North America. As early as 1526, Spanish settlers attempted to colonize the shores of what is now known as South Carolina. This effort failed, but in 1565, Spain established St. Augustine, Florida, the first permanent European settlement in present-day United States. All right. Now it goes on and it talks about other Spanish explorers traveling through North America in latter years. Okay, let's continue. In the Southeast, Hispanics commonly supported the Confederate cause. Many of Spanish ancestry lived in the Gulf Coast region of Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, lands that had once been Spanish West Florida and Louisiana. Now, let's be clear. Most of the Hispanics that we're going to refer to for the purposes of this video were basically Spaniards. They were Europeans living in what we now call the United States. All right. In Louisiana, Hispanics lent their arms to action both nearby and far afield. Many Hispanics in Louisiana had immigrated from the Canary Islands in the late 1700s. New Orleans mustered nearly 800 Hispanics as part of a European brigade, a home of guard of 45,000 to keep order and defend the city. Okay. Again, the Canary Islands. And many people may not know, but the Canary Islands is a series of islands off the west coast of North Africa, I should say. And so this furthers the point of view that what we're talking about and who we're talking about Spanish, we're talking about Europeans. Okay. The notion that we're talking about mulattoes or Afro-Latinos or what have you, that's not part of this discussion because those individuals were enslaved during this time. As I read earlier, many of them fought for the Confederacy. All right. They were all in favor of keeping slavery alive. Let's be clear about that. Now, not all Spaniards fought for the Confederacy. There was a minority that fought for the Union as well, and their particular agendas are up for debate. Okay. Now, Confederate sympathizers include Hispanic women like Lola Sanchez, from a large Cuban family living near St. Augustine, Florida. Now, you remember St. Augustine was founded by the Spaniards. So this is clearly a woman of Spanish descent. Angered that her father had been accused of being a Confederate spy, Sanchez took on the role herself. When Union troops occupied the Florida home, She overheard their plans and informed nearby Confederates of a pending raid. Forewarned, Confederate forces turned the tables and captured Union troops. Okay, here's another excerpt. The Ricans, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but it's a Hispanic group from the Balearic Islands in the Mediterranean, colonized parts of Florida in the mid to late 1760s under British auspices. Now, this is another territory of Spain. So you see the connection between Spain and the United States. So when we're talking about many of these Latinos who were involved in the Civil War, they were more or less Spaniards, okay? Europeans. Okay, here we go. Not all Americans of Spanish ancestry lived in the South. Northern states also had significant Hispanic communities. Many of their members supported the Union cause. Most came from large urban centers like Philadelphia, New York, and Boston. In addition to large population of Germans and Irish and Eastern Europeans, these cities attract immigrants from Spain, Portugal, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Mexico. All of these are Spanish conquests. Again, we're talking about Spaniards. Now, here's another issue. Now, this is going to refer to Puerto Ricans in particular. There was a trade between the U.S. and Puerto Rico in the 1800s. Puerto Ricans have traveled to the United States, as we can see from ship records, and settled primarily on the East Coast. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, many of the Puerto Ricans living in the United States volunteered and served their adopted country. Since Puerto Rico, listen to this, since Puerto Rico was a colony of Spain, these soldiers were identified as Spaniards. Okay. It is not known exactly how many Puerto Rican soldiers served in the Civil War, since Spanish soldiers also included Cuban soldiers and those from various Latin American countries. However, it is estimated that some 3,500 Hispanic troops fought in the Civil War. Only 35. It's estimated that only 3,500. Now let's put that in perspective. There were nearly 200,000 African Americans that served in the Civil War. They did a movie about it called Glory, featuring Denzel Washington and Morgan Freeman. And it talked about the all-black infantry regiment from Massachusetts, the 54th. And they were noted or known to have turned the tide in the Civil War in the Union's favor. Okay, so my issue with John is this. Why would you bring up this small number, although he didn't say the number, but if you look through the history, it's not a significant amount of Latinos that participated in the war. And surely there were less in the American War. If we're only talking about 3,500 for the Civil War, there were clearly less than that in the American War. And those individuals as well were primarily of Spanish ancestry. All right. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to emphasize, let me do this. Before I do this, I'm going to show you something here. Okay. Most of these guys are white passing because they're Europeans. These are Spaniards. Here are some pictures of some of them. Julius Garcia, Adolfo Fernandez, and Federico Fernandez. But basically, these are white passing his Spaniards. So we have to understand who we're talking about. Okay, now I'm going to put in perspective just how small and insignificant the number of Puerto Ricans were during that period of time. Just give me 1 second. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you a chart. You can get this online. It's the Puerto Rican migration before World War II. Let me read the first couple of sentences or three sentences. Okay. Puerto Rican migration to the United States was slow and gradual in the period of 1900 to 1940. Although there was an increase in every decade during the first decades, The migration rate of the entire period from 1900 to 1940 was slow compared to that of the post-World War II period. Okay, so now let me show you a graph, a chart, as it were, to demonstrate the growth of Puerto Rican community. Now, according to the 1910 census, I don't know if you can see it, but to your left, in the year 1910, at least reported, put it that way, 1,513, 1920, 11,811, 1930, 52,774, 1935, 58,200. Now, I'll need you to pay very close attention to 1910, 1,513. So think about this. During the during the Civil War, excuse me, around 1863, 1864, there were clearly even less Puerto Ricans than that. So we're not talking about a large amount of Puerto Ricans. We know that the vast majority of Puerto Ricans, in the hundreds of thousands, came after World War II and mostly resided on the East Coast. So when people say that, yeah, we've been here, Puerto Ricans been here all this time, yes, that's true, but not a great number, a very small number. So the time when Arturo Schomburg came to the United States, he was one of not a whole lot of Puerto Ricans were there. A minimum amount of Puerto Ricans were in the United States during that time. So they can't always use Schomburg as an example that Puerto Ricans were here in America. All right. Now, I think I dealt with the issue of Hispanics or Latinos' involvement in the war. Now I want to deal with the issue of who built America. All right, give me a minute. I'm going to pull up this particular article. All right, here we go. Now, many times when Black people talk about how we built America, we always talk about the slave trade, not the slave trade necessarily, but slavery, and how the free labor was the foundation that gave America its wealth. And a lot of people don't really examine how that happened. So let me just read a little bit of this particular article. It's called The Historical Context. Was Slavery the Engine of America's Economic Growth? Now, the article starts out talking about slavery and its effects on the Europeans in terms of how much of that assisted the wealth for Europe. However, in America, it was a different outcome. For Europe, they didn't really consider it an economic driver. But for America, it clearly was. So I'm going to go down to the paragraph where it talks about America and how much. Let me see. Let's go here. Let me see if I can find it here. Okay. Here's the paragraph right here. And let me read this for you guys. In the pre-Civil War United States, a stronger case can be made that slavery played a critical role in the economic development. One crop, slave-grown cotton, provided over half of the U.S. exports earnings. By 1840, the South grew 60% of the world's cotton and provided some 70% of the cotton consumed by the British textile industry. Thus, slavery paid for a substantial share of the capital, iron, manufactured goods that laid the basis for the American economic growth. In addition, precisely because the South specialized in cotton production, the North developed a variety of businesses that provided services for the slave South, including textiles factories, meat processing industries, insurance companies, shippers, cotton brokers. Now, there's a book that I have. I'm trying to remember the title. It's something about the North being complicit with slavery. We oftentimes give the North a pass. But the North, they needed the South. So this is why you can't buy into this argument that the North was for the freeing of the slaves. It really wasn't. The North was in cahoots with the South. And maybe I'll do a video that really deals with that issue, because we've been fed a lot of garbage about how great the North was. And maybe that's a video for another day. All right. So what I'm going to talk about, let me do this. Let me see where I want to go. Okay. Now, before I go to my next slide, let me ask you guys this question. When you think of America, what two symbols come to mind? Think about that. And I'm going to tell you what I think. For me, it's these two symbols: the Statue of Liberty and the Capitol. And interestingly enough, both of them have some link to Black America. Many people believe that the original design of the Statue of Liberty was supposed to be of a Black woman representing being freed from slavery. And even today, on what we become to know as the Statue of Liberty, there are shackles at the feet of the statue. Okay? For whatever reason, they decided to change the face of the Statue of Liberty. I think we know the reason. Now, the Capitol, on the other hand, is something that African Americans actually built along with the White House. Now, many people may not know that. I remember Michelle Obama made an announcement. She was talking about it, and it angered a lot of white people. Because let's face it, a lot of people don't know that Black people built the White House and the Capitol and basically a lot of Washington, D.C. So my thing is, what is more American than its capital? So when we talk about actually building America, clearly Black Americans built America. When we think about the economic wealth that was generated by Black people, we are the engines that created that wealth. This is the reason why other minorities are attracted to the United States. They come here because of the wealth that was generated by the free labor of Black people. But here's the interesting thing. They tell these minorities to hate us, to look at us as if we're scum. They don't want these minorities to know what we did for this country. They don't want them to know. A lot of them don't even know that because of this 1965 Civil Rights Movement, or 67, they don't even know that Black people are responsible for them even being here. This is how effective the effort to demonize Black people have become in this country. All right, so this is what I want to do. I'm going to play a video, a couple of short videos that's going to document how Black people build America, literally build America.
Imagine Benjamin Banneker, a Black in the 1700s, becoming a self-taught surveyor who played a pivotal role in planning the layout of our nation's capital and inventing a clock in 1753. In 1791 alone, he completed the survey of Washington, D.C., published his first almanac, and stepped outside of his own personality to tell Thomas Jefferson and the Founding Fathers just how wrong they were to ignore the rights of Blacks. A classic example of speaking truth to power. Charles Sarami, former editor of the Kiplinger Washington Publications, is the author of Benjamin Banneker, surveyor, astronomer, publisher, patriot. Thank you very much for being with me.
Thank you for letting me be here.
Mr. Sarami, you've written a number of books. Why did you decide to write on, if I may say, a rather obscure characters such as Benjamin Banneker? Why Benjamin Banneker?
Well, I'm not going to follow this all the way from the time I was 8 years old, but I was 8 years old when I first asked my mother, what does that mean that I had heard it said that a black man had been the one who surveyed the city of Washington. And I didn't even know what surveyed meant, but I knew that black people were supposed to do the heavy lifting, and they didn't usually get jobs of that kind. And I asked that question.
Now, what year are we talking about?
1790. That happened. And
what was the survey?
Washington at that time is always spoken of as having been a swamp. It wasn't quite that bad, but it was bad enough so that it was a hellish place to survey, because a surveyor really would have no marked places to follow to start with these lines. And the Constitution called for Washington to be exactly 10 square miles in each direction, and those lines had to be straight because they were taken away from Maryland and Virginia. You couldn't steal more from the other states than was provided. So it was extremely important to do it, and yet it was almost like trying to survey at sea. There are so many places that just were not, and were swampy, were not straight land, you know. So what they needed was a thing called an astronomical clock. And that's the strange thing here is that the man that they asked onto the team that was supposed to be the black person who didn't have mental endowments and so on was given the really high-tech job in this case, because it was a type of clock that was also attached to views of the stars at the same time. And each morning he had to make sure that they picked up surveying at the same place they had left behind the night before. So that was...
he calibrated this with the stars.
That's right. So this was something he did for over 2 months to get started on the setting out the 4 main lines that would be the city of Washington.
Though the American Revolution broke the colonies, now states, away from the British government, politically, the founders were still heavily influenced because of cultural ties with Europe. So when the designing of Washington, D.C. came up, George Washington himself gravitated to European surveyors and engineers. The man who laid out the plan for the city was Pierre Charles L'Enfant. Although the first president did hire a Pennsylvania surveyor, Major Andrew Ellicott III, to survey the site of Washington, D.C., remember Ellicott's name because it will reappear in a few minutes. Not only was the chief engineer French, but Washington and Jefferson wanted L'Enfant to hire German workers to build the city because of their skill at large construction projects. In 1791, just 1 year into the building of the Capitol, the commissioners hired to oversee the construction, and L'Enfant had difficulty getting German or European workers to sell to the United States in order to construct the District of Columbia. By 1792, the idea of hiring Germans had withered away, and environmental factors began to create availability of the enslaved population to step in as part of the main workforce. Virginia's soil had been depleted by planters growing tobacco as the major cash crop of the state. Additionally, tobacco was very labor-intensive, which kept the slave populations of plantations occupied most of the year. However, planters started to turn toward the less labor-intensive growing of wheat, including Washington himself. This freed up the slave populations in Virginia and Maryland to be hired out, Virginia enslaving the most people with around 300,000 in the 1790s, and Maryland having around 100,000. Planters now hired out their slaves to work on the city in the slow months for wheat growing, or if they could do without them for the year, the Washington, D.C. commissioners would rent the slaves on a yearly basis. The slaves who worked on the Capitol would be housed in a barracks, fed a diet of corn, beef, and pork, and the commissioners also created a hospital to take care of injured workers, black or white. Some of the most common jobs for the enslaved was clearing the land in preparation for laying the foundation of buildings, which slaves also did. They excavated land in order to create foundations and laid out streets. However, one of the most extensive jobs that slaves had was working in the stone quarry that supplied all of the stone for the White House and Capitol building. Cutting out huge hunks of stone and hauling them to the closest waterway, which was then transported to the building site and then unloaded, which took 2 days in some instances to unload one transport, with 6 slaves handling the stone cargo. Interestingly, one of the gentlemen that owned one of the boats that transported the stone was a free black man, who it is assumed made a good living using his boat in the construction of the city. Along with the extensive stonework, 1,000,000 bricks were ordered to be made to construct buildings. The job of creating bricks fell mostly on enslaved women and adolescent slaves who could make 5,000 bricks a day off-site, most likely on their owner's land, then transported to the building site. One of the most amazing stories that I want to relay to you is the story of Benjamin Banneker, who was hired to survey Washington, D.C. He and Major Andrew Ellicott arrived in the area on February 17, 1791, and set up camp. Although he had little experience conducting field surveys, Ellicott needed Banneker for his knowledge of astronomy. His principal duties included monitoring the instrument known as the astronomical clock and recording and studying the movement of the stars and sun. Banneker played an essential role in laying out the city's boundaries. He was paid $60 for approximately 3 months of work he conducted in 1791, a substantial sum of money. When the commissioners failed to attract the Germans they were hoping to be the carpenters of the city, James Hoban, an Irish immigrant and slave owner, entered an architectural design contest for the White House, which he won. Washington hired him to construct the extensive mansion, and Hoban used his skilled slaves as laborers. He brought Peter, Tom, Ben, and Harry, and his assistant, Pierce Purcell, brought Daniel. All were skilled enslaved laborers that were carpenters. They put together a lot of the infrastructure of the building. From the commissioner's records, slaves like Peter the carpenter earned £6, 16 shillings, and 6 pence at a per diem rate of 6 shillings, the same rate being paid to Peter Smith, a white indentured servant of Purcell. However, unlike the indentured servants, Peter the carpenter's wages were paid directly to James Hoban, his owner, and he never saw those wages. When we look at these historic homes, it's always important to understand its construction. It can tell us so much about the time period in which it was built. From Peter the carpenter to Benjamin Banneker, the Black history of Washington, D.C.'s construction is a great story and demonstrates how ingrained African American history is in Washington's history.
All right. Now that's the history. That's the unrefuted history that Black people built America. Now you're going to get some pushback from mainly non-Black people. You're going to get some pushback. They'll say stuff like, well, you guys were slaves. It wasn't your idea to build it, so why should you get credit? So this is the analogy that I would use. This is the comeback that I would use. Let's say you're a homeowner and you wanted to renovate your bathroom or your kitchen, and you couldn't do the work yourself, or even if you could do the work yourself, probably you didn't have the time. So what would you do? You would hire somebody to do the work. And at the time you hire them, you are basically the supervisor, because you're going to tell the workers, hey, I want this here, I want that there. And you're basically giving directions. And so, in essence, the workers are taking their cues from you. Okay? You're not building it, you're giving orders. Now, your friends, okay, the work is done, you pay your workers, and then let's say friends and family come over for dinner or what have you, and they see your new kitchen or bathroom, and they say, wow, who did the work? You're going to naturally say that particular construction company or that particular carpenter did it. You're not going to take credit for it if you didn't do it. So why is there this pushback when we clearly know that Black people built the Capitol, built Washington, D.C., built the White House, lay out streets, things of that nature. We know that they did that, but we don't want to give credit to those individuals. I always would say this: what is more American than its capital? So clearly, Black people built America. No question about it. Latinos did not build America. Why John Leguizamo is putting out that lie is beyond me. Why is MSNBC sanctioning that lie is beyond me. Clearly, this is the anti-Black agenda, pro-Latino agenda. All right. So I just wanted to touch on those topics to give my point of view. And so with that, I mean, it's what more can be said? We just got to continue to stay on our grind, tell the truth, expose these lies. All right, until the next time, peace.